Some acts of courage are so instinctive they happen before fear can interfere. The kind where your body moves while your mind is still processing the danger, where survival instinct gets overridden by something deeper and more fundamental than self-preservation. For Elena, that moment came in the middle of the night, when flames consumed the East Wing stables and she heard an animal trapped inside, howling with a sound that was somehow more human than beast. Every rational thought screamed to her to run, to get help, to let the professionals handle it. Instead, she grabbed a water bucket and a wool blanket and ran directly into fire to save a wolf that shouldn't have been there in the first place. She didn't know that wolf was King Theon in his shifted form, didn't know she was saving the immortal ruler who could theoretically save himself, didn't know that her reckless bravery in the face of certain death would change both their lives forever. She just knew something living was dying, and she couldn't walk away from that. When she emerged from the burning stable with her clothes smoking and a massive silver wolf cradled in her burned arms, she had no idea she'd just earned the devotion of a king who'd spent 3 centuries believing nobody would ever risk anything for him without ulterior motive. Elena had been a palace servant for 5 years, working primarily in the kitchens and occasionally filling in for stable staff when they were short-handed. She was 23, unremarkable in most ways, the kind of person who blended into backgrounds and got forgotten in group conversations. Her parents had been servants before her. Her grandparents had been servants. It was the family trade, passed down like eye color or the shape of your hands. She was good at her work, reliable and thorough, but never ambitious enough to stand out. She'd learned early that standing out as a servant usually meant getting blamed for things you didn't do or attracting unwanted attention from nobles who saw staff as entertainment. Better to be competent and invisible. She had a small circle of friends among the other servants, people who understood the particular exhaustion that came from 14-hour days and the specific humor needed to survive nobility's casual cruelty. She read when she could afford books, usually romances about people whose lives were more interesting than hers. She dated occasionally, brief relationships that never went anywhere serious because her life didn't have room for serious. She was, by most measures, ordinary. Except for one thing. Elena couldn't walk past suffering without trying to fix it. It was a compulsion that had gotten her in trouble repeatedly. She'd been reprimanded for feeding stray dogs when food was supposed to go only to working animals. She'd been lectured for giving her own lunch to a child she'd seen begging outside the palace gates. She'd been warned that taking in an injured bird and nursing it back to health on her own time was inappropriate use of servant quarters. Her friends called it a bleeding heart. Her supervisor called it a liability. Elena called it the only thing about herself she actually liked. She couldn't fix systemic injustice or change the world's cruelty, but she could help one creature at a time, and that had to count for something. The fire started just after midnight on a Tuesday in late autumn. Elena had been in the kitchens doing inventory, one of her rotating duties. She smelled smoke before she saw flames, that acrid scent that triggers immediate alarm. She ran outside and saw the East Wing stables fully engulfed, fire climbing wooden beams with terrifying speed. Other servants were already forming bucket lines, trying to contain the blaze. Stable hands were leading horses out. The animals panicked, but mostly cooperative. Elena counted heads automatically. All the stable staff accounted for. All the horses out. Then she heard it. A howl from deep inside the burning structure. Not a horse sound. Something else. A wolf, her brain supplied, which made no sense because there were no wolves in the palace stables. But the sound was unmistakable and terrified, and Elena's body moved before her mind finished processing. She grabbed a bucket of water, dumped it over herself to soak her clothes, wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders, and ran directly into the inferno while people shouted at her to stop. The heat was overwhelming, stealing breath and searing exposed skin. Smoke made visibility nearly zero. Elena dropped to her hands and knees, where the air was slightly clearer, and followed the sound of howling. She found the wolf in what had been the tack room, trapped behind a collapsed beam that blocked the only exit. The animal was massive, silver gray fur singed black in places, clearly terrified but also weak. Smoke inhalation, Elena's mind noted clinically. Not much time. She tried to shift the beam. Too heavy. Fire was spreading faster, cutting off her own escape route. She had maybe 30 seconds before this became a tomb for both of them. The wolf looked at her with eyes that were far too intelligent, too aware, and somehow, impossibly, it seemed to understand when she gestured for it to move back. Elena used the beam as a fulcrum, braced her shoulder against the wall, and pushed with every ounce of strength she had. The beam shifted 6 inches, not enough to escape, but enough to squeeze through if you were desperate. She grabbed the wolf by its ruff, ignoring the heat and the pain in her burned hands, and dragged it toward the gap. The animal was heavy, easily 150 pounds, but fear and adrenaline gave her strength she didn't normally possess. They squeezed through together. Elena first, and then pulling the wolf after. The exit was blocked by fire now. Elena made a split-second decision, grabbed her wool blanket, soaked it in the last bucket of water near the door, wrapped it around both herself and the wolf, and charged directly through the flames. She felt heat like she'd never imagined, felt her hair singe and her skin blister, felt the wolf press against her, trusting her completely despite being a wild animal. Then they were through, collapsing in the courtyard while people rushed toward them with water and blankets and shocked exclamations. Elena's last conscious thought before passing out was relief that the wolf was breathing. She woke up in the palace infirmary 3 days later. Her hands were bandaged, her arms were covered in salve, her hair had been cut short where it burned. Every breath hurt from smoke inhalation. The physician informed her she was incredibly lucky to be alive. 2nd-degree burns on her arms and hands. 1st-degree burns on her face and neck. Smoke damage to her lungs that would heal but needed rest. She'd be out of work for at least 6 weeks while she recovered. Elena's first question wasn't about herself. The wolf, did it survive? The physician looked uncomfortable. That's not my area. You should rest. Which wasn't an answer. Elena tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain flared across her burned skin. She needed to know, needed confirmation that running into fire had accomplished something other than nearly killing herself. The door opened and King Theon walked in. Elena's exhausted brain took several seconds to process this. Kings didn't visit servant infirmaries. This had to be delirium or medication-induced hallucination. But he crossed to her bedside with an expression that was complex and unreadable. "How are you feeling?" His voice was gentle. Elena's mouth was dry. "Your Majesty, I don't understand why you're here." "Because you saved my life." She blinked, confused. "The wolf? That was you?" He pulled back his sleeve to show burn marks on his forearm that matched the pattern she'd seen on the wolf. "I shift sometimes, usually in controlled circumstances. That night I'd been in the stables checking on a pregnant mare. The fire started while I was in wolf form. The shift takes time to reverse, especially when you're panicking. I was trapped. You ran into fire to save me. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have. Everyone else was helping with horses or forming bucket lines. Reasonable, sensible responses. You were the only person who heard me and ran toward the danger instead of away from it. Why?" Elena struggled to articulate something she didn't fully understand herself. "Because you were suffering. Because I could help. Because walking away from something dying when you have even the smallest chance to save it feels like becoming the kind of person I don't want to be." He was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't know it was me." "Would it have mattered if I did? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But in the moment, all I knew was something alive was trapped and terrified. That's enough reason." He sat down in the chair beside her bed like he planned to stay. "I've lived for 3 centuries. In that time, countless people have claimed they'd die for me. Nobles swearing loyalty, soldiers pledging service, political allies promising devotion. But words are easy. Actual sacrifice is rare. You risked your life for what you thought was an animal. No calculation, no expectation of reward, just pure instinct to help. Do you understand how extraordinary that is?" Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes. I'm not extraordinary. I'm just a servant who's going to have scars and probably lose her position because I can't work for 6 weeks. You're not losing anything. You're being promoted. She laughed, which hurt. Promoted to what? Royal Wolf Saver? He smiled slightly. To my personal staff. With a significant pay increase and accommodations that will allow proper recovery, you'll have whatever you need, Elena. Medical care, time off, anything. Because you gave me something nobody else has in 300 years. What's that? Proof that genuine compassion still exists. The 6 weeks of recovery were strange. Elena was moved to a private room in the servants' wing, nicer than anything she'd ever occupied. The palace physician visited daily to change her bandages and check her healing. Her friends from the kitchens visited when they could, shocked by her promotion and worried about her injuries. And King Theon visited almost every evening, sitting in the chair by her bed and talking with her like they were equals. At first, Elena was terrified. Kings didn't befriend servants. This had to be some elaborate test or cruel joke. But Theon was consistent, showing up night after night with books he thought she'd enjoy or stories about his centuries of rule. He asked about her life, her family, her dreams, and he listened like her answers actually mattered. She learned he was lonely in ways immortality made inevitable, that he could shift into wolf form but struggled with the beast instincts it brought, that he'd been trapped in the fire not just physically but psychologically, the wolf part of him panicking while the human part couldn't regain control fast enough, that her calm voice and steady hands had done more than save his life. They'd given him an anchor when he was drowning in animal terror. They talked about everything, philosophy and politics and the price of bread in the lower districts. He shared 3 centuries of accumulated wisdom. She shared the perspective of someone who'd spent her whole life at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Somehow, impossibly, they became friends, real friends, not the performative relationship of king and subject. By the time Elena's hands healed enough to return to work, something had shifted between them, something neither of them had words for yet, but both recognized. On her first day back, she reported to the royal household office and learned what personal staff actually meant. She'd been assigned as the king's personal attendant, responsible for his private quarters and also apparently for keeping him company during evening hours when official duties ended. It was unprecedented. Personal attendants were always from noble families, people with connections and political value. Elena was common-born with no influence, but Theon had insisted, and nobody argued with the king. Her friends were excited and worried in equal measure. "You're going to be alone with him constantly," her best friend Marina said. "That's either the best position in the palace or the most dangerous." "I don't think he's dangerous," Elena replied. "At least not to me." "Everyone's dangerous when they have that much power. Just be careful." But Elena didn't feel careful. She felt seen in a way she'd never experienced before. The first few months of her new position established a routine. Elena managed Theon's personal porters, ensured his schedule ran smoothly, and accompanied him on evening walks through the palace gardens. They talked constantly, conversations that ranged from trivial to profound. He consulted her on policy decisions, valuing her perspective as someone who understood how laws affected common people. She challenged his assumptions, comfortable enough now to call him out when his ideas were impractical or elitist. The court noticed. Nobles whispered about the king's unusual attachment to a servant. Lady Seraphina, the chief advisor, confronted Elena directly. "Your Majesty shows you favoritism that raises questions." "Questions about what?" "About your intentions, about whether you're manipulating him for personal gain." Elena felt anger spike. "I ran into fire to save what I thought was a dying animal. I didn't know it was the king. I wasn't trying to gain anything. And yet you've gained quite a lot. A prestigious position, royal favor, access most nobles would kill for. I didn't ask for any of it. He offered because he's kind. If you see conspiracy in kindness, that says more about you than me." Seraphina's expression hardened. Be careful, girl. Kings are fickle. Today's favorite becomes tomorrow's forgotten. Build your life on his attention, and you'll have nothing when it shifts. I'm not building my life on anything except being decent to someone who's been decent to me. If that's a crime, charge me." The confrontation left Elena shaken, not because Serafina was wrong, but because she might be right. What was she building here? What happened when Theon got bored or found someone more interesting? She tried to create distance, to protect herself from inevitable disappointment. Theon noticed immediately. "Why are you pulling back?" His question was direct during one of their evening walks.
Elena struggled with honesty. "Because this isn't sustainable. You're an immortal king, I'm a servant. Eventually, you'll move on to someone more appropriate, and I'll be left having gotten used to something I can't keep. You think I'm going to abandon you. I think you're going to realize I'm ordinary and find someone extraordinary." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Elena, I've had 3 centuries of extraordinary people. Nobles with impeccable bloodlines, scholars with brilliant minds, warriors with legendary courage. You want to know what they all had in common? None of them would have run into fire for me. None of them saw me as anything other than a crown and power. You saw a trapped animal and risked your life without hesitation. That's not ordinary. That's the rarest thing I've ever encountered." She felt tears threatening. "I don't know how to do this, how to be your friend or whatever this is, without eventually getting hurt. Then we figure it out together."
He took her hand carefully, mindful of her still healing scars. "I'm not asking you to build your life on my attention. I'm asking if you want to build something together, a friendship that isn't dependent on hierarchy or status, just 2 people who see each other clearly and decide that matters." "What if it's more than friendship?" she whispered. "What if it already is?" "Then we deal with that honestly." He squeezed her hand gently. "I've spent 3 centuries alone because emotional attachment to mortals meant watching them die. But you nearly died saving me, and I realized isolation doesn't prevent pain, it just prevents connection. I'd rather have whatever time we get than spend another 3 centuries wondering what might have been." Elena looked at this immortal king who'd become her closest friend, and possibly something more, and she made a choice. "All right, let's figure it out together. No promises, except honesty. No expectations, except trying." The months that followed tested that commitment repeatedly. The court's whispers escalated into open gossip. Nobles questioned Theon's judgment. Servants treated Elena with a confusing mix of awe and resentment. Political rivals tried to use the relationship to undermine the king's authority. Through it all, Elena and Theon maintained their evening routine. Talking, walking, building something that transcended titles and status. They didn't hide their growing affection, but didn't parade it either. Just let it develop naturally, carefully, with full awareness of the complications. The turning point came during a diplomatic crisis 8 months into their relationship. Foreign dignitaries arrived for treaty negotiations, and one of them brought a daughter clearly intended as a potential marriage match for Theon. Princess Morgana was beautiful, educated, politically connected, everything a king's wife should be. Elena watched them interact during formal dinners and felt inadequacy crush her chest. This was what Theon needed, not a former servant with burn scars and no political value. Morgana was charming and intelligent and perfect. Elena started avoiding their evening walks, convinced she was about to be replaced. Theon found her in the gardens 3 days into her self-imposed isolation. "Why are you hiding?" "I'm not hiding. I'm giving you space to pursue something appropriate. Morgana is perfect for you. She's politically suitable." His voice was cold. "She's also manipulative and cruel. I've watched her abuse servants when she thinks nobody's watching. She's exactly the kind of person I've spent centuries avoiding." Elena blinked. "But she seemed so nice. In public, to people who matter. You want to know what she said to Marina yesterday? Called her illiterate peasant and suggested the palace should raise hiring standards. That's who she is when the mask comes off." The relief Elena felt was almost painful.
So you're not interested? I'm interested in someone who runs into fires to save dying things, who treats everyone with dignity regardless of status, who challenges me to be better instead of just agreeing with everything I say. Morgana is beautiful and educated and completely hollow. You're real. He moved closer. I know this is complicated. I know the court thinks I'm making a mistake. But Elena, I've had 3 centuries of appropriate matches. None of them felt like you. None of them saw me instead of the crown. I don't want perfect. I want real. Is that something you want too? She thought about the risks, the complications, the impossibility of a servant and king building something lasting. Then she thought about running into fire without hesitation because something was suffering, about choosing courage over caution. Yes, she said. Yes, I want that. He kissed her then, gentle and certain.
And Elena felt every burned scar on her arms tingle with the reminder of what had started this. She'd saved his life. He'd given her his heart. Everything else was just details to figure out together. The announcement came 2 months later during a formal court session. King Theon declared his intention to marry Elena, and the court reacted exactly as expected. Outrage from traditionalists, shock from everyone else, protests about bloodlines and political alliances and centuries of precedent. Theon listened to exactly 30 seconds of objections before cutting them off. This decision is made. Elena will be my queen. The wedding will occur in 3 months. Anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to tender their resignation. Nobody resigned, but the court split into factions. Those who genuinely supported the king, those who opposed but wouldn't risk their positions, and those who plotted to undermine Elena at every opportunity. The 3 months before the wedding were brutal. Elena underwent intensive training in court protocol, diplomacy, and royal responsibilities. She faced constant criticism and testing from nobles who wanted her to fail. She made mistakes, lots of them, but she learned from each one. Theon supported her absolutely, shutting down cruelty and giving her space to grow. They faced their first major test as a couple when an assassination attempt targeted Elena. Nothing sophisticated, just a disgruntled noble hiring thugs to eliminate what he saw as an inappropriate influence on the king. Theon's security stopped it easily, but the incident forced them to confront the reality that their relationship had real enemies. Elena was terrified, but refused to back down. I didn't survive fire to be scared off by cowards with knives. If they want me gone, they'll have to try harder. Theon's response was to increase security and make an example of the noble involved. Attempted harm to the queen-to-be is attempted harm to the crown. Treason carries appropriate consequences. The noble was imprisoned, and the message was clear. Elena was under royal protection, and crossing her meant crossing the king. The wedding day arrived with a mix of celebration and tension. Elena wore a dress designed to honor both her background and her new role. Simple enough to not feel like costume, but elegant enough for a queen. She walked down the aisle alone because she had no family to give her away, but also because she was choosing this freely. Theon waited at the altar, looking nervous in a way 3 centuries of experience couldn't hide. When they exchanged vows, Elena added her own words. I saved you from fire because it was the right thing to do. You gave me your heart because you saw something in me I hadn't seen in myself. Today I choose you, not because you're a king, but because you're the person who makes me want to be brave. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to rule with compassion, to never forget where I came from, and to keep saving you, metaphorically or literally, whenever you need it. Theon's vows were equally personal. You ran into fire without hesitation, gave me proof that genuine goodness still exists. Today I choose you not because you're perfect, but because you're real. I promise to honor where you came from while building where we're going, to share power and responsibility, to protect you as fiercely as you protected me, and to spend however long we have proving that sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is recognize extraordinary in unexpected places. When they were crowned together, the kingdom celebrated with complicated emotions. Not everyone was happy, but everyone understood that something fundamental had shifted. The years that followed proved the doubters wrong. Elena transformed how the kingdom treated common people, not through radical revolution, but through consistent, thoughtful policy. She established worker protections, improved living conditions in servant quarters, created educational opportunities for children from poor families. Theon supported every initiative, learning to see his kingdom through her eyes. They ruled as genuine partners. Their different perspectives created balanced governance. They faced challenges, political opposition, economic disruptions, the occasional assassination plot, but they faced everything together, and that partnership proved stronger than any obstacle. 10 years into their marriage, Elena stood in the gardens where they'd had their first honest conversation about what they were building. Theon joined her, and they watched the sunset in comfortable silence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Running into fire, earning a king's devotion, all of it?" He pulled her close. "Not for a single moment. You gave me something I'd stopped believing existed." Elena leaned into him, feeling the scars on her arms that had healed, but never completely faded. "Proof that courage leaves marks. I just did what felt right. That's exactly why it mattered." He kissed the top of her head. "Most people calculate, weigh risks and benefits. You just acted. That instinct to help regardless of cost, that's what makes you extraordinary. I'm still just me, the servant who got lucky. You're the queen who earned everything she has. There's a difference." They stood together as the sun set, the servant who saved the wolf, and the king who gave her his heart, living proof that sometimes the most revolutionary act is recognizing that worth has nothing to do with status and everything to do with character. That real love is built not on grand gestures, but on consistent choice to keep showing up for each other. And that sometimes running into fire isn't reckless. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. If this story reminded you that courage is about doing that's right despite the cost, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment with the word moon if you believe real love is built on genuine connection, not status. Share this video with someone who needs to know that being ordinary doesn't mean being worthless. And sometimes the most extraordinary act is simple kindness. Thanks for watching. And remember, the scars we earn saving others are proof we chose courage over comfort, and that's always worth it.